You got to keep the lens tip-top clean. In programming, there's something called loops, as in looping, over and over and over and over and over again. And that's one of the powers, really, of computers. In fact, computers are able to do certain repetitive tasks over and over and over again super quickly. Saves us a lot of time. So in all programming languages, you have something called the loop. And a loop allows you basically to loop over information, to loop over variables and data. Data, as you know, is just a fancy word for information. So in Python, like so many other programming languages, we have something called a for loop. We have a while loop. Anyway, another word for loop is iterator. It iterates over something over and over again. So for example, let's say you're like me and you have a code. So you have a code and you have medicine for your code. Here's the medicine right here. So if you wanted to count how many pills you had in this tray of, I guess these are Tylenols, you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And pretend your buddy Iggy is not paying attention. He goes, Steph, how many pills do you have? And I go, Iggy, I just counted them. So can you do it again? Can you iterate over it again? And I go, Iggy, pay attention. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pills. That's an iteration, right? I'm iterating over it. And I'm just, to be sure, I'm going to count them again. I'm going to iterate, loop through it one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's an example of an iteration, a loop. I'm counting information. I'm counting how many pills are in this pack here. So in programming, when you're building video games, drawing shapes, maybe you're pulling records from Facebook's database or Instagram's database, you have a whole bunch of records. For instance, you may have an Instagram and you may have 10,000 photos in your Instagram. How will the Instagram app know how many photos you have? Well, it's going to use a loop. It's going to use a while loop probably, maybe a for loop. Later on in the course, we're going to look at the differences between a for and a while loop and why would you want to use them and so on. But now that we understand at least the basic ideas about what a loop does, let's actually write some Python looping code, and we're going to write the for loop. All right, let's get into it. All right, now that we got the basics covered, let's actually write some code, and we're going to take a first look at the for loop. You know, when you're learning how to code, you got to write code as much as you possibly can. It's kind of like boxing. When I was boxing, one of my coaches used to say, if you got to box, you got to box. You got to get in the ring, you got to box. You might get your nose broken, but that's how you're going to learn how to box. With coding, you got to get in there, you got to write code. Fortunately, though, when you're writing code, you can't get your nose broken. You might get a little sore finger or something from clicking on the mouse, but you won't get your nose broken. Anyway, so I'm going to option spacebar, launch IDEL. IDEL, as you know, is the Python code editor. So I'm on Mac again, but you could use Windows, doesn't matter. So first thing I want to do is create a variable. So we're going to create a variable, Stefan. Okay, so now we have a variable that's ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our for loop. So we're going to go for. Now we know that's a keyword in Python, a special word, because it's highlighted in orange. See, it's orange. So for x in, and then we're going to type in name. So I'm going to explain what this all is in a second, but let's just run through it. So then I'm going to hit enter once. I'm going to say print looping. All right. Then I hit enter again, and then I hit enter again. There we go. So you notice it wrote out looping. How many times is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I wonder why I wrote it out 6 times. That's interesting. Notice how the text Stefan, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's look at some of this code. For instance, this x here is a variable. When you are creating a for loop, you start with the keyword for, Then you put in your variable, and I'll explain what this variable does here. This variable here it's pretty much like this variable here, except when you create a variable in a for loop like this, what's happening, well, I'll explain what's happening in a second. So for x in, that's another keyword. You know it's a keyword because it's highlighted in orange. In name. Name is, of course, this variable name. So what's going on with this particular for loop code here? What's going on is that Python knows that we're writing a for loop because we're using the for keyword and the in keyword. So what we're saying is that we're going to loop through the contents of the name variable. Remember, a variable is just a container that holds information. And for each thing that our for loop finds in that variable, in this case for each letter, stick it in X. So what happens with the for loop is Python reads what's in the name variable, and for each letter it prints out the text looping. And at the same time, it's inserting each letter in X. So it goes one loop, and then it prints looping for each, okay, it's for S. And then it goes to T. You got a T, it does another loop, it prints out looping. It goes to E, boom, 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 prints out looping again. Okay, so let's make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm gonna go for each X in name. Notice I'm gonna have to have this colon here. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go print, and I'm gonna say X. Now what's X? Remember, when the for loop runs, every time it runs into a letter, it will stick that letter in X. And then in this case, we're going to print out whatever letter happens to be in X, and then it will start over again. So it goes once, twice, many times, etc. So for each letter in the variable name. So watch this. Hit enter again, hit enter. There you go. So what we want to do now, let me just move this up. And we're going to say print, I'm going to put some text, the letter in the variable X, variable X is space plus X. Hit enter again. The loop runs, it starts, and again, it's looking inside the variable name, right? We declared the variable name up here, and it just, first time it loads into X, it loads S, then it loads S, and then it loads E and F, blah, blah, blah. This is just a basic introduction to the way variables work in Python, but it's a start.